So I have a little topic that I want to poke people's brains about a little bit and get a bit of discussion going. And so this will be both with the Twitch chat currently watching this video, as well as the YouTube viewers watching this on YouTube. And that is about, obviously, competitive play. So in competitive card games, it feels like we have a lot of the different card games are just kind of like, they're almost like they're not even connected by the genre anymore, right? Because you'll have, you'll have Yu-Gi-Oh players and you have the best Yu-Gi-Oh players. You'll have Magic players and the best Magic players. You'll have Pokemon players and the best Pokemon players. And then you have Vanguard players, etc, 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 right? But it feels like there's not that much crossover for the most part. There are exceptions, and I've talked about this in the past when I made my video about like how many card games is too many, about people like, Samir Bahar, who just tops and wins in every single card game they touch. Or now most recently, we see the boys like Kai here in the chat and Derek, who qualified for Pokemon Worlds, right? And like Solemn has been doing his best in Yu-Gi-Oh! And I've been, grinding away at Shadowverse Evolve too. But generally speaking, it feels like card games are relatively exclusive. And I think I'll talk about that a little bit more in the future. But at the same time, you can kind of say that, just because you are the best, let's say, Vanguard player, let's say like you're the world champion of this year, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're the best card game player. And at the same time, just because you're the Yu-Gi-Oh! World champion doesn't mean you're the best player of all TCGs, right? It feels like, TCGs are they're not as interconnected in that way. And I mean, obviously in other genres too, like I'm going to be comparing this to fighting games. Just because somebody wins in Street Fighter 6 at EVO this year doesn't mean they're the best fighting game player of all either, because it doesn't necessarily mean that the person that wins in Guilty Gear Strive is any worse than them either. But all of that put aside for a second, the reason why I'm making this video is because I was actually, a couple months ago, I picked up the book by, basically Umehara Daigo's autobiography, The Will to Keep Winning. And there's quite a few interesting things in this book. To give you a TLDR, the book is basically an autobiography where he sort of talks about how he doesn't prioritize or value winning as much as he does value learning and continuous self-improvement. So his passion is self-improvement. His whole thing is self-improvement and basically just being able to continuously grow and not letting just celebrating one dub stop him from continuous growth. And he kind of talks about like not popping off as hard as other people after winning, because at the end of the day, what matters is that he can keep getting better every day. And instead of just being like, the best in that one moment. And there's something really interesting. There's one small part in this that I think I read it, and most of everything I read until that part, I was like, I kind of agree with that. But then this one, I was like, this is one thing I want to bring up and talk about. But anyway, so somewhere, if you want to actually read the book, somewhere in chapter 5, there is a part that says, choose the most competitive game. And in this section, I'm not going to read it here, but in this choose the most competitive game, he basically talks about that he makes it a point to choose the fighting game that has the most amount of competition, so the highest amount of players, and to avoid being stuck in niches. So this is very easily applicable to card games as well. And so he talks about how he usually plays a game for like a year or maximum like 3 years or so, and typically switches between games the moment the next one becomes the most popular, because the most popular game attracts the highest level of competition. And therefore, because the most popular game has the highest level of competition, you'll essentially then have the greatest opportunity to improve, because then you will face against opponents that will test your skill more than less popular games. And so when I read that, I was like, that's a very valid point. But it's a little bit, a lot of the other concepts in the book have been very easy to apply to card games for me. So that's kind of how I read it. I kind of apply to what I compete in. And this was the one where I was like, well, switching card games and switching fighting games is very different, because switching fighting games, it's like, let's say $60 to buy the game, and then like $30 for one DLC pass, and then there'll be another DLC pass and another one. So maybe like 120, 150, let's say, for the full price of competing, not including your console and your PC, etc., right? Whereas for card games, I mean, the buy-in cost to play can be very cheap. It can be $4, it can be $15, it can be $30, it can be $40, it can be $50, it can be $100, it can be $1,000, right? Depends on what you want to do. But to compete you know, there's competitive ready products like Stride deck sets, let's say, that's like 50 bucks, 60 bucks. But then if you really want to be the best, you'll have to make sure that those decks are not just up to date, but you might want to have a couple decks in your arsenal. And the meta will also change as well, so you have to keep upgrading, and just for one game, you're looking to invest like 500 bucks or something, right? So immediately the money argument makes it a bit hard to apply, but I didn't want to let that stop me from thinking about it and really just kind of like breaking down the idea of this whole argument. Do you mean new patches, or do you mean new games, or what? Or you mean switching games, or you mean like DLC drops? Usually a DLC pass lasts about a year, I want to say. So fighting games, to give you an example, right? From 2020. 2020, we had the release of Granblue Fantasy Versus, which was sadly released at the beginning of COVID, so it didn't pop off as much, but a lot of people picked it up. And then I'm pretty sure the year after that was Guilty Gear Strive, where everyone went in on Guilty Gear Strive. And so that's already 1 year later. And then I think within that same year, we had the new Melty Blood. And then after that, we had the new KOF. And now we have Street Fighter 6 this year in 2023. And then we're also getting Granblue vs. Rising this year. And there's also Tekken 8 coming out as well. So if you want to compete at the very best, like right now your focus is Street Fighter 6, maybe in a few months time it'll be Granblue vs. Rising, and then later on Tekken 8, right? So actually that switching happens, it depends on the releases. Right now we're going through a fighting game renaissance, but you know, that's a different topic for a different time. But coming back to the whole thing of card games, right? So budget things aside, I feel like it's kind of hard to, I think like applying Daigo's point is a little bit difficult, because it feels like some of the games that are at the top of popularity feel kind of similar. Because if I asked you, is Pokemon TCG more popular at a competitive level, or Yu-Gi-Oh, or Magic? Okay, Magic maybe these days you could say is less, because Wizards thinks that competitive Magic doesn't exist anymore. But if you had to compare between competitive Pokemon, which recently hit some of the highest record numbers of player participation numbers in competitive game history in the United States, to Yu-Gi-Oh, which apparently, I found out, has actually run into issues where it's not retaining players, according to interviews with Konami people. So if I asked you right now to tell me, if you had to choose the most competitive game to play, to, let's say, follow Daigo's advice to become better, would you choose Yu-Gi-Oh, or would you choose Pokemon in that sense? And keeping it generic, like not just talking about Japan or the West or Europe or your home country, but just like try to think globally, right? Competitive Pokemon's arguably more popular in Japan than the West. That's fair. Okay, everyone's saying Pokemon. And I would kind of agree with that, because Pokemon is also, yeah, there's affordability, there's more people. It's also just kind of like the fact that it's the biggest it's the biggest media franchise of all. So obviously that makes it more accessible. So then would you say that the skills and growth that you get from, let's say, competing at the highest level and constantly grinding Pokemon is more valuable than doing that in Vanguard, or doing that in Digimon, or doing that in Battle Spirits? Like obviously I'm naming some of the games that are like one tier down in terms of popularity. Not really. Pokemon gives you money. That is actually a very valid argument, by the way. Pokemon does give you money, and that is actually like something that is a tangible prize you get that turns into something, right? So your time that you put into competing can be converted into monetary value, whereas in other games that don't award money, that cannot. But that's, again, you know, a bit of a, there's like other companies try to shift that by doing prize cards that are worth a lot of money, so you still can get monetary value from them in a sense. So it kind of becomes a bit of a sticky argument. But thinking about that kind of this argument, I've also been applying it a little bit here and there too when playing other card games. And of course, you know, as most of you know, I've been chosen as one of the Shadowverse Evolve English edition ambassadors, and obviously I play a lot of Shadowverse Evolve these days as well. And I definitely do feel like sometimes, you know, playing, you know, Vanguard has been going through its own like renaissance of popularity, right? It's been getting its second win lately, with events hitting 1,000 players, and just even events outside of Tokyo hitting like into the high hundreds. But then in the same location where Vanguard hits 500 players, Shadowverse Evolve hits 1,800, and just like, ooh, right? I could be meeting much more high skilled and much more like, I could be learning so much more from competing with players that maybe surpass the level of skill that I would meet on average in Vanguard, for example, right? So yeah, I think Kai also brings up an interesting point there in the chat. Nothing can compete with the amount that Pokemon invests, which they don't expect to receive a return for, which makes it uncomparable. That's right, like Pokemon makes too much money off of the IP that they can afford to throw so much money into the circuit, whereas other companies can't afford to invest that much into it as well, right? And yeah, it's true, like Pokemon staples are very accessible as well, so that kind of coincides with the cost argument. So I'm glad we're having this discussion. It's like not just me presenting my points, but it's also a discussion with chat, because I think it's kind of interesting. Like, can you justify, like, let's say, right, if we let's say take Daigo's argument, right, of in order to pursue the passion of self-improvement, we switch games to the most popular one at the time. So let's say Vanguard was at a pretty high popularity amount during late G. Let's say we played super competitive in late G, and then let's say Yu-Gi-Oh pops off with the toss format, and you go play Yu-Gi-Oh at the highest level. And then now, let's say during COVID, the only, in my opinion, the card game that had by far the highest concentration of skill during 2020 and early 2021 was Digimon. Everyone from every game was playing Digimon. And so let's say then you played Digimon for that period. And then after Digimon died off a little bit, you know, the hype kind of like simmered a little bit, I would say that's when Pokemon picked up, right? Once IRL play came back, the company that did it the best was the Pokemon company. So then you went ham on Pokemon, and then One Piece comes out and everyone's playing One Piece. So then you go play One Piece. And now Pokemon is hitting record high numbers again. So now you go play Pokemon. Is that sustainable? Like, let's say your goal isn't to be the best at a certain card game, but it is to be the best TCG player, period. You want to prove yourself across every single title, and you just keep choosing the most popular title at the time. So if you have money, yeah. But the thing is that at the same time, I feel like you have obviously costs a lot of money, but at the same time, you'll have in a lot of these card games, you'll have someone that's constantly grinding that one game. And by swapping in and out all the time, you still kind of have some things where no matter how much time you put in, there will be someone that, let's say, like maybe, I mean, let's say you play these games professionally, right? So you put all your time into it, you know the card pool even when switching around. I feel like somebody that's dedicated to that one game because I think like the popularity switches between games. It's rarely that just the newest one is the most popular. Here in Japan, it is. So like when Shadow vs. Evolve came out, it was the most popular. And now it feels like Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, Shadow vs. Evolve, One Piece are like the big four that are standing at the top of like TCG popularity. And I guess Duel Master is also kind of there, so like 5. And I feel like, yeah, like a lot of people, yeah, they actually do like sell and buy decks at the same time as well. So it's like you compete, finish competing, sell everything, buy into the next thing, and just keep rinse and repeating, right? So I feel like this might be, as Akuda says in the chat, just like the nature of fighting games where it's easier to switch around, where CGGs have that staying power and you get rewarded for really concentrating and putting your time into it as well. So I just kind of wonder, like, can we apply this argument of like, you should be playing the most popular game? Like, is it really that bad to be dedicating to your niche? Like, maybe if you want to truly reach the highest level of play, maybe you won't find it in Vanguard, because some of the best players, like, it is actually true, some of the best players from Vanguard have hopped to other games, right? Some of them play Yu-Gi-Oh, some of them play One Piece, some of them play Shadow vs. Evolve, some of them play Pokemon, and, you know, so should you always just focus on the game with the highest concentration of high skill play in order to become the best? That's kind of, I think, what this video is trying to ask, and I'm not really sure if it is, right? I feel like to an extent it is valid, and that's why, like, you know, focusing on Pokemon, for example, is very rewarding. And it kind of begs the question, it's like, the time you're putting into getting better at Vanguard, could that be put into somewhere else? And then I saw this tweet from everyone's good friend, Outer Orange, the other day, where I think also, yeah, as Ronan says in the chat, it's like playing multiple games teaches you different things, so it's not a bad thing to hop around. We mentioned that in a previous video too, but I like this tweet from Orange the other day, where she wrote about, so for those of you that are watching this that aren't part of the Vanguard community, Outer Orange is a Vanguard content creator and player, and so she wrote, playing One Piece TCG feels like I picked up a controller for the first time and about to tackle this insanely skill-leveled platform game. The matchup knowledge is insane and games are so neck and neck. The mountain is pretty steep and wins are satisfying AF. And then she says, Shadow vs. Evolve has a similar feeling for this too, actually. So branching to other TCGs has been really fun. I will say it does show where Vanguard lacks when it comes to rewarding play. Vanguard has it, but it's not the same at all. Vanguard feels lacking in this area. And that's kind of what brought this video on a little bit. Obviously, me reading the chapter was the first thing that inspired this video, but reading this, you know, where Vanguard doesn't necessarily reward you for skilled play as much, obviously because of a lot of the skilled, not the skilled, the luck-based mechanics like VOT obviously does take away from that. But I feel like some of the more recent games like One Piece TCG and Shadowverse Evolve definitely does reward you for high skill play, and you feel it quite quickly. And Pokemon TCG has been like historically quite good about it too, as well. So this video doesn't necessarily have a conclusion or a point it's trying to drive. I'm just kind of throwing a bunch of ideas at you and a bunch of discussion points, and I want to hear your thoughts as well. So let me know in the comments, what do you think? Is it sustainable to pursue just becoming the best TCG player by playing the most popular game at the time? You know, Kai gives us, as someone that's doing it, Kai says, Pokemon is so satisfying to play. Opening Lugia plus 2 Archeops plus Ultra Ball is the epitome of satisfaction, bro. Such rewarding gameplay. But I think that it's an interesting discussion to be had. And I do know some people, you know, they ask themselves the question is like, oh, should I be playing this TCG when I could be playing Pokemon? And I could be, you know, I would have this super high production live stream where I'm at the spotlight and I can be winning money and all this kind of stuff. Or like Shadowverse Evolve, where it's like there's no money involved, but the prize is like the prize card for the most recent GP is, I saw it in a store recently for 800,000 yen. So that's like, you know, $7,000. That's you know, it's pretty good. That's pretty good. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. This is definitely like an open discussion video. This isn't driving a big conclusion. So let me know your thoughts in the comments, what you think about it, and I look forward to engaging with some of you guys in the comment section as well. If you like these kind of videos, give it a like, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe as well. Greatly appreciated. And if you want to support the channel in other ways, please do consider becoming a YouTube channel member for some exclusive bonus content, and check out all my stuff in the description as well, such as Twitter, Twitch, etc. Otherwise, that's gonna be it from me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.